Okay, class, where we are now is the Diencephalon. Remember, we did the Telencephalon, which was the cortex and the basal nuclei. Now we're moving down to the Diencephalon, which forms the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. Thalamus, hypothalamus, and it encloses that third ventricle. Remember the third ventricle, cerebrospinal fluid? All right, so let's talk about it. The thalamus, also called the inner room because where it's located, is 80% of the diencephalon. It's a pear egg-shaped structure. See, here it is here. It's kind of shaped like an egg in a way. Okay, egg-like structure. Connected at the midline by the intermediate mass. Now let me show you the intermediate mass. The intermediate mass is this area right here, that little circle right there that holds the two halves together. Right there's that intermediate mass. It's a solid structure between the two hemispheres. So we come here. It contains 4 groups of nuclei, anterior, ventral, dorsal, and posterior. So it has a bunch of nuclei, bunch of clusters of neuron cell bodies. It has a dorsal, an anterior, it has a bunch of them. But they are arranged in the front group, the posterior group, and the back group, and all that. And the nuclei perceive in fibers from the cerebral cortex. So really the thalamus is an integration. Since there are so many nuclei, approximately 26, they're clustered in a small area. Neuronats had to name the nuclei primarily by the relative locations. It's a lot of nuclei, each of these colors. So they kind of group them. We're not going to name all of them because this is not a detailed neuroanatomy course, but the nuclei receive input from sensory projections below the thalamus and nuclei within the thalamus. Okay? So that's what we're looking at. Okay? That's the picture of these nuclei. Okay? The thalamic function, sensory afferent impulses converge. Remember this. Okay, think about it. The spinothalamic tract, anterior and lateral spinothalamic. All sensory to cortex must go through the thalamus. So the thalamus is kind of like the vice president. You don't speak to the president till you speak to the vice president, or really the chief of staff. I shouldn't say vice president. Chief of staff, and then you go, okay. Gives a crude sense of pleasant versus unpleasant. So the spinothalamic would send the signal to the thalamus. The thalamus would say, oh, it hurts, or oh, this feels good. But it really wouldn't give detail. What it wouldn't do, it wouldn't give detail. Then it would send the signal to the primary somatosensory cortex. Remember that? Then the primary somatosensory cortex would say, where is this good feeling? Or where is this pain? Then the association area of the somatosensory cortex, remember the association area of the somatosensory cortex, would then interpret what it is. You got just cut with a knife, for example. Okay? All right. So impulses are started out, edited, and relayed as a group. All inputs are sent to pass through the thalamus, mediate sensation, and so forth. Now, we go to the hypothalamus, which obviously is underneath the thalamus. The hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has a bunch of nuclei too. Those nuclei are the ones that do temperature, satiety, which means getting full, hunger, osmotic pressure, all kind of stuff. All kind of stuff it does. Okay? Remember we did temperature with it, the preoptic nuclei. Okay? So it does a whole bunch of, see, that's preoptic nuclei, did the temperature. Let's go further. So the hypothalamic regulates autonomic nervous system. It's the CEO of the autonomic. It regulates the anterior pituitary gland. When we talk about that, perception of pleasure, fear, body temperature, feeding regulates feelings of hunger and satiety, regulates sleep and wake, osmotic pressure. That hypothalamus does a lot of stuff. Now, it's not protected by the blood-brain barrier. Why? Because you need to see it. You need that area needs to be able to see stuff there to regulate. Okay. Endocrine functions of the hypothalamus release hormones, control secretion from the anterior pituitary. You also have the posterior pituitary nuclei in there. Okay, the posterior pituitary has what we call neuroendocrine cells. The cells are neurons, but they secrete hormones. The two hormones are ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin, the one that it makes the uterus contract in child delivery and everything. Okay. The epithalamus is where your pineal gland. Now, a lot has been worked on with the pineal gland. It extends from the posterior, and it has something called melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone involved in sleep regulation, sleep-wake cycles, and mood. Melatonin. In darkness, you produce more of this. Okay. That's the epithalamus. So we have the Diencephalon has the epithalamus, which is above the thalamus, then the thalamus, then the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus, the thalamus do a lot of stuff. Thalamus is more of a relay station to the cortex. From below. And the hypothalamus controls a whole bunch of body functions, automatic body functions, and control and sensing and all kind of stuff. Okay? So that's what we're looking at in that particular aspect. Okay? Melatonin, which is the epithalamus, secreted primarily from pineal, controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. It occurs in darkness, as I said. It is inhibited by light, particularly blue light. Causes drowsiness, lower body temperature, and we found it to be somewhat of an antioxidant role, immune, dreaming. So it has a lot of functions. A lot of the functions are not really that well known. It's not one of the best studied areas in the brain, to be very honest. Not really. Okay. So there's that epithalamus there. Okay. That's the ventral aspect there of the brain that you have. Okay. So now we're to the brain stem. And what I want to do is start another video for the brain stem. Okay.